Hello children, this is Roshni from LearnoHub, the free learning platform where you can study math, science, English, tips and tricks all for free at learnohub.com. So today in this video, we are going to talk about modes of heat transfer, how heat transfer takes place from one object to another. So in that context, we will talk about conduction, convection and radiation. However, in this particular video, we will talk majorly about conduction, and this is very important and this is going to be interesting too. So be with me. Let's get started. Now, have you tried any of these? Have you ever seen something being cooked in your house, in the kitchen? So even if you have not cooked it yourself, have you ever seen your mom cooking something in the kitchen? So what does she do? She normally takes a vessel, maybe a pan or something, and she puts it on the stove. Right? So the vessel contains the vegetables or whatever she wants to prepare. And what happens? How the food gets prepared? The food gets prepared with heat. Now, as you heat the vessel, so the vessel gets heated up, and inside whatever you have, maybe the vegetables and all, they get fried up or they get cooked up, they get boiled. So, how this heat transfer takes place from the stove to that vessel, how the vessel is getting heated up, because heat is being transferred from the fire to the vessel. So from the source of heat, it is actually getting transferred to another object, and again from the vessel it is being transferred to the contents which are present inside the vessel, like the vegetables or leaves or whatever. So what's happening? Heat transfer is happening. Similarly, if you have a candle which is well lit, and if you try to place your hand over the candle, maybe keeping some distance, how do you feel? You feel warm. So why do you feel warm? Because the heat is getting transferred from the candle to your hand. So heat transfer is taking place. Again, when you wash clothes, how do you dry them? So the clothes contain a lot of water immediately after you wash them. So when these wet clothes are kept in the sun, what happens? The sun gives a lot of heat. So the temperature is increasing. So the heat is being transferred from the sun to the clothes. So in all these scenarios, we see that the heat is being transferred from the source to some other object. Now here in this section, we are going to discuss how is heat being transferred from one object to another. What are the various ways by which heat can be transferred? So how do we define heat transfer? It is the transfer of heat energy from one system to another, or from one part of the system to another by virtue of temperature difference. Now, when I talk about heat transfer, it is not necessary that it always has to be from the stove to the vessel. It also happens that the same object gets experience heat transfer from one part to another. So let us say, if you have a pan, so that pan handle is also made up of the same metal. So what happens? Now when you heat the pan, so initially the pan becomes very hot, but gradually the handle also starts becoming hot. So gradually the heat gets transferred from one part of the same pan to the other. And how this heat transfer happens? Due to temperature difference. So heat will get transferred only when the heat will get transferred from one object to another, or from one part to another, only when those two objects or those two parts of the object are at different temperatures. If both of them are at the same temperature, then there will be no heat transfer taking place. So temperature difference plays a major role, in fact the most important role in the process of heat transfer. For example, what happens when you touch a glass of cold drink which is completely chilled, where as soon as you touch it, you feel cold, right? Now, you touch it for a few seconds and then you remove your hand. What happens to your fingers? So your fingers become cold. Why is it cold even after you have left the glass? That's because while you were touching the glass, there was heat transfer. Why there was heat transfer? Because there was temperature difference between the two objects. What are the two objects in this case? The first object is the glass. The second object is your hand. So in this case, the temperature of your hand was more. So let us say this was the temperature of your hand and this was the temperature of the glass. So in this case, temperature of your hand was more than the temperature of the glass because the glass was very chilled. So as soon as these two come in contact, as soon as you touch the glass, heat starts getting transferred from one object to another, and heat always flows from a body which is at a higher temperature to a body which is at a lower temperature. So heat starts flowing from your hand to the glass. So therefore your hand is actually losing heat. So when you lose heat, what happens? You tend to become colder, and that is why when you leave the glass, even after that your hand has become colder because it has lost a lot of heat to the glass. And if you touch the glass now, it will be comparatively a little more warm than before. Similarly, when you touch a hot glass of coffee, what happens? In this case, your hand becomes hot because in this case the heat transfer takes place from the cup to your hand, because here the cup is at a higher temperature than your hand. So this is how heat transfer takes place. So heat transfer will take place only if there is a temperature difference. Now in case you are holding a glass which is at the room temperature, it is neither cold nor is it hot. So in that case the temperature of your hand also remains the same. That's because there was no heat transfer which took place, because both the objects were at the same temperature. So there was no temperature difference. So this is how we define heat transfer. When we talk about heat transfer, we are actually talking about substances transferring heat from one part to another or from one object to another. The question is, do all materials conduct heat? So if I take any material, will it start conducting heat? Will it allow heat to pass through it? So let us look at some examples. So let us take this example where we take a metal pan with a metal handle. So if you have this kind of pan in your kitchen, you can try this out yourself. So let's say that the pan is made up of metal. The handle is also made up of metal. So this is also metal. So this is one type of pan which you have taken and you put it on the gas. When you switch the gas on, what happens? The pan gets heated. After some time, maybe after a couple of minutes, 1 or 2 minutes, try to touch the handle. What happens? The handle also becomes hot. That is the first thing that you observe. In the next example, what you do, you take a pan, but this time the handle is not made up of metal. Instead, it is made up of plastic. So you take a pan with a plastic handle. And in fact, these days, most of the pans will have a plastic handle. Now, you put this pan over the gas and then after some time, you observe it. What do you see? The pan gets heated, of course, but when you touch the handle, it is not heated. So why is a difference between the two? This difference is because some materials allow heat to get conducted while some other materials do not allow heat to pass through them. So in this case, what happens is the fire is here. So the source of heat is here. So obviously the pan gets heated. But gradually it spreads to other parts of the pan also. That's how heat transfer happens from one part of the object to the other. And since it is all made up of metal and metal conducts heat, it allows heat to pass through it. Therefore, the handle also becomes heated. But in this case, what happens is the pan definitely gets heated because it is made up of metal. But since this handle is made up of plastic and plastic does not conduct heat, plastic does not allow heat to pass through it. Therefore, the plastic handle does not get heated. So what do we observe from this? So from this we observe that metals conduct heat. That is, metals allow heat to pass through them, but plastics do not conduct heat. So with this, we get to know that it is not necessary that all materials will conduct heat. So based on which materials conduct heat and which do not, we can classify materials into two types, conductors and insulators. So the names that define itself, conductor, something which conducts heat. So that is called conductor. So conductors and insulators are like poor conductors. They do not allow heat to pass through them easily. So conductors are materials which conduct heat. For example, they are also called good conductors of heat because they are very good at it. Best examples are metals, whether you talk about copper, you talk about aluminium, you talk about any metal, they are all good conductors of heat. Now, when you talk about the insulators, they do not allow heat to pass through them easily. So, the concept of conductors and insulators of heat are very similar to what we have learned in conductors and insulators of electricity. Now, there are some materials which allow electricity to pass through them. They are called good conductors of electricity. Similarly, those materials which do not allow electricity to pass through them, they are called poor conductors of electricity. Similarly, these are conductors and insulators of heat. So examples of insulators are plastics, wood, water, air. These are all examples of poor conductors. That is why, because of this, wood or plastic containers are not used for cooking purposes. So if you have a plastic container, you cannot put it over the gas, because when it gets heated, it melts, but it doesn't allow heat to pass through it. But if it is a metal conductor, it will allow the heat to pass through it, and it will provide that heat to the vegetables or whatever is the content is inside the vessel. So these are conductors and insulators. So let us start with conduction. The word conduction is derived from the word conduct. So anything which allows heat to pass from one part, to pass through itself, they are called conductors. And that is how the way heat transfer takes place in conductors is called conduction. So let us see what it is. So it is the transfer of heat between different parts of a body because of their temperature difference. So it is like the same object, within the same object, heat is being transferred from one part to another part. And why anywhere heat transfer taking place is because of difference in temperature. Wherever there will be temperature difference, only there heat transfer will take place. Now, when this heat transfer takes place within one particular object, then it is called conduction. There it is known as conduction. So here you can think of the example of the metal pan with the metal handle. So in that case, what happens? The entire part, whether it is the handle or it is the pan, it is all part of the same vessel, right? But what happens when you heat it? First of all, this portion gets heated up. Then the heat gets conducted to the fish which is present inside the pan. Gradually it also heats up the handle of the pan. So what is happening here? Here the same object is being heated, but different parts of the body is being heated because there is a difference in temperature. So this has a more temperature than this. So therefore heat flows from here to here, and that's how the handle also gets heated. So this is an example of conduction. So heat is always transferred from hotter end towards the colder end. So hotter end to colder end. That is how heat transfer takes place. Now, conduction is the most important mode of heat transfer in solids. Because by looking at the definition itself, you can understand that it takes place in solid objects. So in solids, they get heat only by conduction. Now again, as we discussed in the previous slides, that it is not necessary that all solids will conduct heat, because there are many solids which do not conduct heat. The insulators, for example, plastic. Now instead of the metal handle, if you have a plastic handle, so there this concept of conduction will not work. And the reason is plastic doesn't conduct heat. So plastic is an insulator of heat. So therefore this concept of conduction works for solids, and that too those solids which are good conductors of heat. Now, if you look at the thermal conductivity, that means how much heat is conducted by an object, it is seen that solids are the best conductors. Again, I am telling it is not that all solids are. I am only talking about the good conductors of heat. So solids are better conductors than liquids, and liquids are better conductors than gases as far as thermal conductivity. Thermal conductivity means the ability to conduct heat. Thermal always means heat, and conductivity is nothing but the ability to conduct heat. So let us take this simple example to understand the concept of conduction. So let us suppose that we have two different objects. Say this is object A and this is object B. And these two objects are connected to each other through this rod. So this is a rod. So now they are all conductors. So they all conduct heat. So let us suppose the object A is at a temperature say TA and the object B is at a temperature TB. and we say that temperature of A is greater than the temperature of B. That means object A is hotter than object B. Now, what should happen as per the concept of conduction? As per conduction, whenever there is a temperature difference, heat transfer will take place and conduction will happen in case of solid objects. So this is all, it involves all solids. Also, it has a temperature difference. So that way, heat transfer should take place from object A to object B. So this is how heat transfer should take place. But will this heat transfer take place for infinite period of time? Not really. Because when the heat transfer start taking place, what happens? Gradually, the temperature of A starts reducing because it is losing heat. And the temperature of object B starts increasing because it is gaining heat. Because heat is getting transferred from A to B. It is like if you are spending money. So what are you doing? When you are buying stuff from a shop and spending money, so you are losing money. And the shopkeeper is gaining money. So the same thing here. So this is you and this is the shopkeeper. So heat, it is losing heat, so its temperature is decreasing. It is gaining heat, so its temperature is increasing. Now after some time, what will happen? After some time, the temperature of A and the temperature of B will become equal. And when after some time, when temperature of A becomes equal to temperature of B, what do we call? We say that a steady state has reached. Steady is like stable. So in this stable state, now do you think that there is a temperature difference? There is no temperature difference. So as soon as this steady state is reached where both are at the same temperature, after that there will be no conduction taking place, because heat transfer will take place only when there is a temperature difference between the two objects. So this is how the concept of conduction works. Let us look at some interesting facts associated with this concept of conduction. Did you know that why do houses made of concrete roofs get very hot during summer? Now, houses which are made up of concrete roofs, they are so hot because the thermal conductivity of concrete is not very small. Now, what is thermal conductivity? The ability to conduct heat. So that means concrete is able to conduct heat quite well. So even though it is not, the thermal conductivity is not as great as metals, but yet it is not very small also. So because of its thermal conductivity. So thermal conductivity of concrete is not very small, even though it is small than metals, of course. So if you actually start constructing houses made up of metal roofs, that's it. It will become difficult to survive in summers because it will become that hot. So therefore, what do people do? So people prefer to give a layer of earth or a foam insulation on the ceiling. So on the ceiling, if you have this additional layer, then the heat transfer inside the room gets prohibited and therefore the room remains cooler. So see, these are all actually the applications of what we learn. So we learn about conduction, but this is an application of conduction. So conduction is just one mode of heat transfer. There are two other modes as well, that is convection and radiation. Now we will talk about each of them. Now in this slide, I'll give you an analogy to explain the three of them. Now when I talk about conduction, it is something like this. You have a person A, you have another boy B. They want to transfer the ball from A to B. So how can this be done? So this ball is nothing but heat. Okay, so now let's first try to understand this example in terms of the boys and the ball. So let's say A wants to transfer this ball to B. So how can A do this? Now there are three different ways by which A can transfer the ball to B. So the first way of doing this is he asks a lot of his friends to stand in between. So they just fill the distance between A and B, and then A transfers the ball to the next boy. The next boy transfers it to the next one, and that is how it reaches to B finally. So see, A was here, so A will pass on the ball to this guy will pass it on to this guy, and so on, and finally it will reach B. So this is the first way. of transferring the ball to B. The next way is that a friend comes in, there is this another boy, and this boy will take the ball, and this boy will carry the ball to B, and that's how the ball gets transferred to B. So in this case, you really do not need so many boys to get the ball transferred. Just one boy is enough, so that one boy could transfer it to B. So here this boy actually moved. So this boy actually had to move from one place to another. But in the first scenario, none of them had to move. Everybody was standing at their position and they just shifted the ball to the next person. But in this case, this person actually had to move from this point to this point. And the third mode of doing this is ask nobody's help. You just throw the ball from here and the ball reaches B. So that is the third way of transferring it. Now, conduction, convection and radiation are exactly like this. So conduction is just like this first method where you have to transfer heat from one part to other part of the same object. Why same object? Because you actually have so many particles in the medium which transfer the heat. So the ball is like heat, and these people who are transferring the ball, they are like the particles in the medium. So the medium is what? For example, you take the example of conduction. When you have a pan with a metal handle, so that pan is made up of small particles, right? It is a solid. Solid is made up of all particles. So the particles inside the solid are only transferring the heat from one point to another, and that is how it is reaching from one end to the other end of the vessel. So that is how conduction happens. What happens in convection? In convection, you really do not need that substance to be a solid, but you still need some medium, some particles of the medium. And here in convection, there is actual movement of the particles of the medium. So you see actual movement of this particular boy. So that is convection. And in radiation, no medium is required. You do not need anybody. So here these extra people who were actually helping in the process of transfer, they were the medium. But here you do not need a medium. You just throw it and it will reach B. So you do not need a medium at all. So this is a simple way of understanding the concepts of conduction, convection and radiation.
So Bacha Party, what do you have to say about this video? Did you like the video? If you have a feedback for us, do let us know in the comment section of the video. And if you really liked the video, do not forget to share it with your friends so that they can enjoy learning too. So keep learning, keep enjoying, and I will meet you all very soon with a new video with a new topic. Till then, take care.